Marcus Hale was a loyal friend, a devoted boyfriend, and an innocent man, until one rainy night when a murder he didn't commit sent him to prison for 20 years, while his best friend married the woman he loved and took over his entire life. Marcus Hale was the kind of man everyone trusted. He kept his head down, worked long hours at the local auto shop, and spent his free time fixing up old engines or relaxing with the two people he cared about most, his best friend Jason Brent and his girlfriend Alina Moore. The three of them had been inseparable since high school. While most people drifted apart over the years, they stuck together, creating what many in their small town of Glenridge saw as an unshakable bond. On the surface, it looked like the perfect friendship. Marcus, the grounded one, Jason, the outgoing, dreamer, and Alina, the steady heart in the middle of them both. To outsiders, Marcus had everything. He had a stable job, a home he was proud of, and a relationship that seemed built to last. He wasn't flashy, but he was dependable. Jason, on the other hand, was always chasing something bigger, new jobs, new ventures, and new ways to get ahead. He had charm, confidence, and the ability to talk his way into or out of anything. He was the kind of person who made things happen, even if he didn't always finish what he started. Alina was drawn to both in different ways. She loved Marcus's loyalty, but Jason's energy had always been intriguing, even if she never admitted it. They spent weekends together hosting barbecues, going on spontaneous road trips, or watching movies in Marcus's living room. From the outside, everything looked ideal, but subtle cracks were forming beneath the surface. Jason had always lived in Marcus's shadow, even if he pretended not to notice. While Marcus worked to build a quiet life, Jason watched as the girl he secretly wanted and the life he secretly envied slipped further from his reach. It didn't help that Alina leaned on Jason more often than she should. Whenever Marcus was busy at the garage or too tired to talk, she'd call Jason, just to vent or get advice. He was always there, always ready to listen. Still, Marcus had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. He trusted them both with everything. He believed their bond was unbreakable. When Alina needed help with her car, Jason was the one she called. When Jason lost his job again, Marcus helped him get part-time work at the garage. That's how things worked in their trio, always looking out for each other. But what Marcus didn't know was that Jason had started keeping secrets. Small things at first, nothing obvious, a lie here, a cover-up there. He would borrow money without asking or flirt with Alina when Marcus wasn't around. It was never enough to be caught, but it was enough to feel like control. He didn't just want what Marcus had, he believed he deserved it. By the time anyone noticed the shift in their dynamic, it was too late. The betrayal that would tear their lives apart had already been set in motion, and Marcus, the most loyal of them all, was walking straight into a trap he never saw coming. It was a cold, rainy night in November when everything fell apart. The storm had rolled in fast, soaking the streets of Glenridge and cloaking the town in a heavy, wet silence. Most people stayed indoors, huddled away from the weather. But somewhere, in the darkness, a violent crime was unfolding that would change Marcus Hale's life forever. Around 10:47 p.m., the alarm at Dobbins Pawn Trade was triggered. Police arrived within minutes to find the glass front door shattered and Charles Dobbins, the elderly owner, lying on the floor behind the counter, a single gunshot to the chest. He was already dead. It was a shocking crime. Glenridge wasn't known for this kind of violence. The pawn shop had been around for decades, and Charles was beloved by nearly everyone in town. Investigators began piecing together the scene. A drawer was open, some items missing, but not much. It didn't feel like a professional job. It felt rushed, sloppy. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station captured a blurry figure in a dark hoodie running to a pickup truck, blue, older model, peeling off down the street moments after the alarm went off. One detail caught everyone's attention. The truck looked exactly like Marcus Hale's. By sunrise, police were at Marcus's door. He had no idea what was happening. He told them he'd been home all night, alone, and had gone to bed early. But as the officers searched his house, things escalated quickly. Under the floorboards in the garage, they found a handgun wrapped in an oil-stained rag. Ballistics would later confirm it as the murder weapon. To the officers, it was an open and shut case. Motive didn't matter. The evidence was strong, and it all pointed in one direction. Marcus was arrested on the spot. News spread through Glenridge like wildfire. People were stunned. The quiet, dependable mechanic who'd never even raised his voice was now the prime suspect in a brutal killing. Marcus kept insisting there had been a mistake, that the gun wasn't his, that he hadn't left the house that night. But his words carried little weight once the investigation unfolded further. His fingerprints were found on the counter at the pawn shop, though, as he explained, he'd been there just a few days earlier to buy a small tool set. The surveillance footage, while unclear, showed someone with his build. The truck. It matched his exactly. No one had seen anyone else driving it recently, and most damning of all, an anonymous tip had come in just hours after the murder, naming Marcus as the killer. That tip was taken as a sign of guilt, not suspicion. Even those who knew Marcus well began to question what they believed. People wondered if maybe he'd been under financial stress or hiding some dark side. The media leaned into the drama, a trusted local man snapping and turning violent. And all the while, one person stayed eerily quiet. Jason Brent. He never spoke to reporters, never showed up to Marcus's trial. And when Marcus scanned the courtroom, he noticed something else. Alina was there, but Jason wasn't. Not once. In the months following Marcus's conviction, life in Glenridge slowly moved on. The shock faded, conversations quieted, and people resumed their routines. But while Marcus sat in a cold prison cell trying to make sense of what had happened, a much quieter betrayal was beginning to unfold outside those walls. It started small, subtle shifts in behavior, carefully chosen words, and decisions made behind closed doors. No one saw it coming, and Marcus was too far away to notice the pieces of his old life being quietly rearranged. Jason Brent became a steady presence in Alina's life almost immediately. He told friends he was simply supporting her, helping her, through a difficult time. After all, Alina had lost someone too. It made sense that Jason, Marcus's closest friend, would want to help her navigate the storm. They were often seen together, shopping for groceries, going out for coffee, attending community events. At first, people gave them the benefit of the doubt. They were grieving. They were leaning on each other. But in time, the lines blurred. Alina eventually moved out of the small house she had once shared with Marcus. Jason helped her pack. Within a few months, she was living in a newer home just outside town, a home that Jason had purchased in his name. He had started doing well for himself, having taken over Marcus's old garage and rebranded it as Brent Auto Solutions. With Marcus gone, there was no one left to question how Jason managed to acquire the property, the tools, and the client list so easily. People assumed he was just stepping up to fill a void. Behind the scenes, Jason and Alina's relationship shifted. What had once been friendship quietly became something more. They didn't announce it. They didn't post photos or tell many people. But whispers started spreading. A former co-worker of Jason's claimed to have seen them holding hands in the parking lot late one evening. A neighbor mentioned hearing laughter and music late at night from behind the curtains of their home. No one said anything to Marcus. No one visited him to share the changes. 2 years after Marcus's sentencing, Alina and Jason were married in a quiet, out-of-state ceremony. There were no big announcements, no wedding photos published. Only a few people were invited. The event was kept secret from anyone who might ask questions. When word finally reached Glenridge, it was already old news. Marcus, still clinging to hope from behind bars, was left in the dark. Alina had stopped visiting after the first year. Her letters became less frequent, then disappeared altogether. Eventually, a single envelope arrived, her handwriting barely familiar. She said she had moved on. She didn't mention Jason by name, only that she had married someone who cared for her, that she hoped Marcus would someday understand. There were no explanations. No apologies. By the time Marcus finished reading the letter, the weight of the betrayal hit harder than the conviction ever had. He hadn't just lost his freedom, he'd lost his entire world, and he had no idea that the person responsible had been standing beside him all along. 15 years had passed since Marcus Hale was sent to prison, and by then, most of Glenridge had either forgotten him or remembered him only as the quiet man who had snapped. The world outside had changed. New businesses opened, neighborhoods expanded, and people moved on with their lives. But Marcus remained frozen in time, confined to the same concrete walls, haunted by questions that had never been answered. He had stopped hoping for justice. Until, one day, someone else started asking the questions he had long since buried. A non-profit group specializing in wrongful convictions took an interest in Marcus's case. They reviewed his file as part of a broader investigation into flawed forensic work and questionable convictions from that era. Something about the case stood out. The timeline was shaky, the evidence was circumstantial, and the anonymous tip that led police to Marcus? It had never been fully verified. What began as a routine file review quickly turned into something more serious. Evan Stroud, a soft-spoken but persistent investigator with the group, began digging deeper. He started with the tip, an anonymous call from a payphone that had placed Marcus at the scene of the murder. After cross-referencing phone records and old case notes, Evan discovered that the payphone used was located just a few blocks from Jason Brent's former apartment. It was a detail no one had questioned before. Most assumed the caller was someone who had seen something or overheard a conversation. But now, the origin of the tip looked suspicious. Meanwhile, advances in technology allowed for a fresh look at the grainy surveillance footage. Using modern image enhancement software, experts noticed something that hadn't been visible before. The suspect in the footage had a slight but noticeable limp. Marcus had never had any issues with his gait. But Jason? He'd injured his leg in a motorcycle accident during college and still walked with a subtle, uneven step, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. The evidence that once pointed to Marcus began to unravel. Evan tracked down a former employee of Jason's garage, Frank Delaney, who admitted that years ago Jason had made an offhand comment during a late-night drinking session. He had laughed about taking care of things and how someone else paid the price. At the time, Frank didn't think much of it, but hearing it now, in context, it felt like a confession. With mounting evidence, Evan brought the findings, to state prosecutors. A reinvestigation was ordered. Jason was questioned for the first time in years, and his calm, polished persona began to crack under pressure. Details he had once shared casually didn't match the official records. His financials from around the time of the murder showed a sudden influx of cash, unexplained, undocumented. When pressed, he claimed it came from a loan, but there was no record of such a transaction. It became clear that Marcus hadn't just been the victim of bad luck or a sloppy investigation. He had been deliberately framed. The gun, the tip, the circumstantial evidence, it had all been orchestrated. Slowly, the truth emerged, piece by piece. The man Marcus had once called his brother had carefully dismantled his life, taken everything he valued, and left him to rot in a prison cell. Now, for the first time in 2 decades, Marcus's name was back in the headlines, but this time, not as a criminal. As a man on the verge of proving he had been innocent all along. The day Marcus Hale walked out of prison, the sky was overcast and gray, but to him, it felt like sunshine. After 20 years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit, he was free. The court had vacated his conviction, citing newly uncovered evidence of deliberate framing, falsified tips, and prosecutorial oversight. The judge's voice had been calm as she read the ruling, but for Marcus, every word echoed with decades of pain, loss, and betrayal. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just breathed. For the first time in years, it felt real. But freedom didn't come with peace. The world Marcus returned to was not the one he had left. The people, the places, even the sounds felt unfamiliar. Glenridge had changed, and so had he. He no longer recognized the garage where he'd once worked. It now bore Jason Brent's name in bold letters, standing like a monument to stolen identity. Worse still, Jason and Alina were still living their lie, comfortably nestled in a home Marcus had once imagined building with her. News of Marcus's exoneration spread quickly. Most people offered cautious sympathy, but few admitted their silence. Over the years, some said they had always had doubts, but were too afraid to speak. Others simply avoided him, not knowing what to say to a man who had lost everything. Marcus didn't need their pity. What he wanted was accountability. Jason Brent was arrested shortly after Marcus's release. With Frank Delaney's testimony, the forensic inconsistencies, and the financial trail now exposed, authorities had enough to charge him with obstruction, perjury, and conspiracy. He denied everything at first, calling it a smear campaign. But the evidence was undeniable. The community watched in stunned silence as the man they had come to admire, successful, respected, untouchable, was led out in handcuffs. Alina did not appear at Jason's arraignment. By then, she had moved out of their shared home. Whether it was guilt, fear, or a need to escape the collapsing facade, she made no public statements. Marcus never spoke to her again. Her betrayal was too deep, her silence too long. Whether she had known the full truth or simply chosen to ignore it no longer mattered. She had stood by Jason while Marcus withered in a prison cell, and that choice could never be undone. Despite his freedom, Marcus knew there was no going back. The life he had before was gone, his youth, his dreams, his relationships, all stolen by someone he had once trusted like a brother. There was no compensation for time lost. The state offered a settlement, but money couldn't replace birthdays missed, family funerals unattended, or the years of watching the world from behind bars. Still, Marcus refused to live in bitterness. He chose something else. He began speaking out, sharing his story with those who would listen. He worked with the same nonprofit that had helped free him, offering hope to others still fighting for justice. The betrayal had shattered him, but the truth had rebuilt him piece by piece. And now he wasn't just a man who had survived, he was a man who had overcome.